For the most part, the night was quiet. The chickens and geese had rusted for the night, and the goats had lost the excitement of being in a new environment. They now huddled together in a corner of the living room. I would almost say it was peaceful, until every animal began screeching at the top of their lungs. The birds flocked around the house. The goats erupted in a panic, running around trying to find any hiding place they could. Most now cowered under the dining room table. Almost as quickly as the commotion began, it all quieted down. I looked at Uncle Jeremy in bewilderment, but the look in his eye told me he'd seen all of this before. His eyes trained on the door. A familiar sound slid across the other side of the door. It was the scratching that we'd heard the night before. In the same fashion, the scratching intensified before it erupted into a frenzy of banging. I eyed the door as the latch struggled to keep whatever was on the other side out. A voice soon followed suit. "Jeremy, Jeremy, Jeremy." "Oh, Uncle Jeremy." It sounded like me. For some reason, whatever was on the other side was using my voice to bait my uncle to the door. The voice changed to that of Uncle Jeremy's. "Marcus, open the door, Marcus." Uncle Jeremy looked at me before raising his revolver to the door. One shot rang out, and the sound of something hitting the floor was evident from our vantage point. My uncle took to his feet and made his way over to the door, revolver at the ready. I wanted to tell him to stay put, but couldn't find the courage. He opened the top latch, followed by the bottom. The door cautiously creaked open, and Uncle Jeremy peered out the small crack. I will remember the words that came from his mouth for the rest of my life. "Oh, shit." Suddenly, a clawed hand reached through the small crack in the door and pulled him from the comforts of the cabin. I heard screams but wasn't sure if they belonged to Uncle Jeremy or the thing impersonating him. Everything went quiet, and I wrestled with the idea of seeing what the outcome of the skirmish was. Just then I heard a voice that brought me a mountain of relief. "It's okay, kid. I got him." I heard Uncle Jeremy grunt as he seemingly took to his feet from the other side of the door. But as the door slowly swung open, my heart dropped. It wasn't my uncle. It was the creature that had taken him. Its body was tall and skinny, its skin pale, and its face, well, it had no face, just a plain identity. But as it stood there and turned in my direction, a mouth began to part, skin sticking to its upper and lower jaws until they eventually gave way to jagged teeth. It spoke one more time in my uncle's voice. "Marcus." It took to a sprint, and when it was just feet from me, a revolver round spat out. The creature flopped to the floor in a green pool of blood. Standing at the door was my injured Uncle Jeremy. For the time being, my brother is crashing on my couch to help us feel safer until we can meet with our landlord. We've collected evidence and ring footage to show just how far this has gone. I'm sure the landlord and police think we're just being dramatic, but we're not backing down. Either he goes, or we break our lease and get our full security deposit back. We're also looking into filing for a temporary restraining order, which some commenters mentioned might be quicker than going through the police. We met with our landlord last week, but unfortunately, they're not as willing to help as we hoped. They won't evict him from his unit. Instead of moving, we asked if we could switch to another unit in the complex. They offered us a one-bedroom apartment on the terrace level, meaning my roommate and I would have to share a room in what is essentially the basement. Not exactly what we wanted. We spoke with the police again, but they said the notes and letters weren't enough for stalking or harassment charges, especially since he lives just 3 feet away. He probably just thinks you're cute, they said. They took the ring video and promised to review it and get back to us this week. In the meantime, we've moved in with my parents. Shout out to them for being amazing. It's frustrating to pay over $2,000 a month for a place we can't live in, but we're actively searching for new apartments. Money is tight since we'd have to pay to break our current lease and start a new one. So while it's not the update we were hoping for, we're safe for now, and that's what really matters. If anyone has suggestions on how to raise $5,000 in a month, please let me know. My journey over the past 5 years. This is my story from the past 5 years. I'm currently 20 years old, and my ex, now my stalker, was 23 when it all started. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Alex. Back in early to mid-2019, I stumbled upon Alex's Instagram profile and immediately recognized him as a guy from my high school. I always thought he was attractive, so I followed him. To my surprise, he responded to one of my stories, and we started chatting. It quickly became clear that we had feelings for each other. Before long, we were calling each other and even falling asleep on the phone together. But one night, I woke up to hear him whisper something really disturbing like, "I would hurt you." I brushed it off, thinking I must have been dreaming. Eventually, we started dating, and for a while, everything seemed fine, until he would kiss me and bite me hard enough to draw blood. I told him multiple times to stop, but he wouldn't listen. A couple of months in, a girl posted a video on Instagram accusing Alex of cheating on her. He denied it and claimed he didn't even know her, and I, unfortunately, believed him. The breakup and stalking. After 10 months together, a friend sent me a screenshot of Alex being active on Tinder. That was the last straw. I broke up with him. A few months later, I started dating someone new, and that's when Alex went off the rails. He bombarded me with calls and messages, so I blocked him. But he didn't stop there. He began driving past my house every day. I had started my first job by then, but he found me there too. I even switched jobs, and somehow he still tracked me down. Things calmed down for a bit until I unexpectedly received pink roses with his name on the card. Being young and naive, I unblocked him and thanked him for the flowers. We ended up hanging out again, and before I knew it, we were texting regularly. My 17-year-old self thought it was cool to be dating an older, popular guy, so I fell back into the relationship. After a few dates, we started seeing each other again, and I eventually lost my virginity to him. The dark side of the relationship. Things took a dark turn. We were sleeping together regularly when one day he texted me saying he had a surprise. He sent me a file, and when I opened it, I found a video of us having sex. I had no idea he was recording us, but foolishly, I stayed with him, ignoring all the red flags. Eventually, the relationship became sexually and physically abusive. One night, while I was drunk and passed out, he had non-consensual sex with me, leaving bruises on my head and abdomen. A few days later, I finally had enough and broke up with him for good. The aftermath. After our breakup, Alex wouldn't stop texting and calling me, begging to see me. I refused every time, but he kept pushing. He even threatened to come into my house while I was sleeping, and this went on for months. I met someone new and started dating again. Since I was having trouble at home, my new boyfriend asked me to move in with him, and I did. Somehow, Alex found out where I was living and began showing up at our place. We started documenting everything and eventually filed for a restraining order. We were granted a temporary order until our hearing. When the hearing finally came, the judge extended the order for 6 months, warning that a long-term order would be issued if Alex violated it. Violation of the restraining order. Just days after the extension, Alex broke the order by parking in front of my house multiple times. I called the police, but they never even warned him. One day, while I was at work, I got a call from the police saying Alex had tried to buy a firearm, which violated the restraining order. They merely warned him not to do it again and informed me for my safety. In the following days, Alex started tailing me to work and swerving in front of my car. My boyfriend and I decided to move to a different place within the same city, but Alex managed to find us again, escaping the situation. Finally, my boyfriend decided that since the police weren't helping, we needed to leave the state. In the middle of the night, we packed our things and drove to another state where his family lives. We've been here for about 2 months now and have found good jobs. We plan on leasing our own apartment soon. Life has been mostly peaceful, but I still hear updates about Alex from back home. He's telling everyone that we're still together and even posting pictures of me on Instagram. My story isn't over yet, but I'm determined to move forward. When I was 18, I moved to South Africa to live with my dad. Being British, this was a huge change for me, and of course, I had my fair share of teenage angst. My dad lived near the airport in Johannesburg and often traveled for work, which meant I spent a lot of time on my own. Sometimes he was away for a month, and other times for up to 3 months. I managed my own shopping and did some light cooking, but since I didn't drive yet, I walked everywhere. My dad didn't set many rules for me, but he had one important guideline. Don't go out alone at night. He didn't mean just staying in the yard, as we lived in a gated community with a security guard at the entrance. What he really meant was not to leave the neighborhood after dark, because it wasn't safe, thanks to the risk of robbery. I heard him, but I didn't take it too seriously. It got pitch black by 6 p.m., darker than any night I'd ever experienced in London. Without streetlights, it felt like complete darkness. One evening around 7 p.m., I got a craving for some crisps, or potato chips, as my American friends call them. After being home alone for 2 weeks, I was bored and decided to break my one rule. The security guard tried to stop me when I told him I was going out. He even offered to buy the crisps for me after his shift. But I was nearly 19, tall, and full of bravado. I wasn't scared. The road from my dad's house was well lit, and the store was only about a mile away. However, there was a dark avenue I had to walk through, lined with trees and no lighting at all. Just pitch blackness. A cold wind blew, and the sounds of insects and birds felt amplified in the silence. That's when I heard footsteps. I glanced back but didn't see anyone, so I kept walking, trying to convince myself I was just imagining things. A little further along, I heard the footsteps again, but still couldn't see anyone. I was walking in the middle of the road, thinking it was safer. But then I realized the footsteps were coming from the path beside me. I quickened my pace and started singing loudly, hoping to drown out my fear. But the footsteps continued, making my anxiety grow. To reassure myself, I stopped and turned on my phone's flashlight, pointing it toward the path. To my horror, I saw a man peeking from behind a tree. He looked about 30 and was watching me intently. I swear he had something in his hand. It looked like a knife, but I couldn't be sure. Panic set in, and I turned around and ran home as fast as I could, barely listening to anything around me. My heart raced, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The security guard heard me coming and had the gate open before I even reached it. He looked at me knowingly as I panted, trying to catch my breath. He didn't ask me about it, but I could tell he understood what had happened. I never saw that man again, and I often wonder what could have happened if I hadn't run. I didn't tell my dad or anyone else about it. Oh, and by the way, the security guard did get me the crisps. After that night, I decided it wasn't worth the risk, and I never went out alone at night again. A troubled friendship, the stalker among us. Back when my friends and I were in our early teens, we spent a lot of time hanging out at a local park in town. That's where our story begins, with a kid around our age who had a strange way of making friends, stalking. His technique was to follow people around for days or even weeks until he got noticed or just gave up. He blended in by simply being around us, so we had no idea we were being watched. If we noticed anything at all, it was that he was just a familiar face in the background, enjoying the same spaces we did. Eventually, we invited him to join us in a game, completely unaware of his intentions. Before long, he was part of our group. We'd invite him to hang out and look for him in the park whenever we could. We spent a couple of years together, especially during our free time when school was out. Sure, he had his quirks, but we didn't mind. Having another friend was fun. He even eventually confessed that his stalking was how he made friends. At the time, we laughed it off. His actions seemed odd, but not alarming since we were all around the same age. We didn't recognize it as a red flag. After all, he wasn't an adult, so there wasn't a clear sense of danger. We had a lot of normal moments and good times, but as we grew closer, things started to get complicated. One of the first red flags was his tendency to overshare personal information. While sharing struggles isn't inherently bad, it revealed he had a troubled childhood with issues at home and school. It became clear that he had made some questionable choices at a young age. Looking back, we realized his upbringing probably influenced his odd behavior, but that didn't excuse it. Over time, his behavior became more problematic. He wasn't just quirky. He could be mean and rude, especially to those he was closest to. He often crossed the line from playful teasing to outright cruelty. One notable incident involved him getting into a fight after using a racial slur against another kid. As his creepier tendencies emerged, we noticed he was desperate for romance. He tried to date multiple people in our group or acquaintances, often leading to unwanted advances. This wasn't just with romantic interests, it extended to friendships as well, creating tension within our circle, especially when he pursued relationships that weren't reciprocated. One particularly concerning incident occurred when he nearly obtained the address of a girl he liked. Fortunately, it ended up not happening, but it wasn't hard to see how this could have escalated into something much worse. The peak of his stalker-like behavior came with his obsession over a girl in our friend group. He engaged in all sorts of unsolicited contact, from playing with her hair to forcing himself into her space and getting jealous of her interactions with other guys, despite them not even dating. She made it clear that she didn't want any of that. But he didn't take the hint. The situation hit a breaking point when he sent her explicit material, trying to persuade her to come over. This prompted her to involve the police. We never learned exactly what happened afterward, but it took him out of our lives for a while. After that, he stopped talking to most of us, only reaching out occasionally to a few people he still saw at school. Eventually, he moved away, and we lost contact altogether. Some of us decided to cut ties with him due to his increasingly problematic and arrogant behavior. We heard through mutual friends that his life took a downturn, even though it initially seemed like he was doing better. While some of his actions could be traced back to his troubled background, that doesn't excuse the rude and creepy things he did. We can only hope he has since recovered and improved his behavior in his new life, as he seemed to be making progress during our last brief encounter.